Story 1. Memories that aren't mine. It started with a dream. At first, I thought it was just one of those strange, meaningless things the brain cooks up when it's bored. In the dream, I was in a house I didn't recognize, but it felt like I'd lived there forever. There was a woman in the kitchen, humming as she cooked, and 2 kids running around the living room. The air was filled with the scent of something sweet. Cinnamon and apples. It wasn't my life. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment. I don't have kids. I don't even have a girlfriend. But the dream felt so real, like a memory I couldn't place. When I woke up, I could still smell the cinnamon. I brushed it off as a weird coincidence. Stress, maybe. But then, it happened again. In the second dream, I was sitting at a dinner table with the woman. My wife, apparently, and the kids. We were laughing about something, the kind of warm, easy laughter that comes from years of familiarity. The boy had my eyes. The girl had her mother's smile. Maddox's brows creased together as he read the contents. Strong senses of similarity swept through Maddox's mind. When I woke up, I could taste the wine we'd been drinking. The dreams kept coming, each one more vivid than the last. I lived entire days in that house, going to a job I'd never had, playing with kids I didn't know, kissing a woman who was somehow my wife. I could remember the sound of her laugh, the way her hair smelled, the tiny scar on her left hand. And when I woke up, those memories stayed with me, as clear as any memory from my real life. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? It sounded insane. Instead, I started writing everything down, every detail, every moment, hoping to make sense of it. But the more I wrote, the less it felt like dreams. It felt like a life I'd forgotten. The night it all changed, I'd just woken up from another dream. I'd been tucking the kids into bed, the girl begging me for one more story. When I kissed her goodnight, she whispered, "Don't leave us." The words were still echoing in my head when my phone buzzed. The screen showed an unknown number. At first, I thought it was a spam call and almost ignored it. But something made me answer. "Hello." There was a pause, and then a voice I recognized immediately. It was her. "Hi, honey," she said, her tone warm and familiar, like we'd just spoken yesterday. "Did you miss me?" Her smile was warm when she spoke to me. I didn't miss it. I couldn't breathe. "Who is this?" I managed to whisper. She laughed softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "You know who I am. Why are you pretending?"
"Because you love..."
"This is a mistake," I said, my voice shaking. "I don't know you." Her tone darkened. "But I know you, and I know where you live." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be real. But as I looked at the call log, the number was still there, staring back at me like a taunt. Suddenly, I realized the number was from a text I'd received the day before. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just a prank, a coincidence maybe. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Her voice had been exactly the same as in the dreams. I could hear it replaying in my head, the way she laughed, the way her tone shifted when she said, "I know where you live." By midday, I was ready to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But then, the photo arrived. It came as a text message from the same unknown number. The image loaded slowly, each line of pixels revealing a little more. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. It was blurry, dark, as if taken in a hurry. But then I recognized the outline of my apartment door. Someone had taken a picture of my front door. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. I locked the door immediately, checked it twice, then dragged a chair in front of it. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. I tried calling the number back, but the line went straight to voicemail. My voice shook as I left a message. "Whoever this is, leave me alone. I'll call the police." I hung up, feeling more helpless than ever. That night, the dreams came back. This time, they weren't warm or comforting. They were wrong. The house felt darker, the air heavier. My wife's face was twisted in an expression I couldn't read, her eyes too wide, her smile too sharp. The kids were crying, their voices echoing through the hallways. In the dream, I found myself standing in front of a mirror. My reflection wasn't mine. It was older, worn, with eyes that seemed to hold years of pain. "You can't leave," the reflection said, its lips moving out of sync with the words. "To this process, only final consent will be obtained, and slowly we will all be restored." When I woke up, the smell of cinnamon lingered in the air, and I wasn't alone. Someone had been in my apartment. I found the first sign in the kitchen, a glass of water, half empty, sitting on the counter. I hadn't left it there. My throat tightened as I noticed the second sign, a faint indentation on the couch cushions, as if someone had been sitting there. But the worst was in the hallway. Pinned to the wall was a photograph. It was old, the edges yellowed and curling. It showed a family standing in front of a house. The house from my dreams. And I was in it. I stumbled back, my mind racing. The man in the photo looked exactly like me, down to the mole on his cheek. The woman beside him was my wife, and the kids stood in front, smiling like nothing was wrong. She paused, and I wondered if she was trying to decide. My phone buzzed again. Another text. This time it was a single word. Tonight. I didn't leave the apartment that day. I didn't eat. I barely moved. The hours stretched endlessly, my eyes darting between the locked door and the photo pinned to the wall. When the clock struck midnight, my phone buzzed again. The text was a photo of my living room, taken from somewhere behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. My breath came in ragged gasps as I clutched the phone, the screen trembling in my hands. "Who are you?" I whispered into the silence. "What do you want from me?" I moaned. Was someone making impossible statements to themselves to get the truth out of me? The reply came immediately. Another text. "Come home." The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. "This is my home," I shouted, the sound echoing off the walls. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Was it? Or was it just another dream I hadn't woken up from? The air in the room grew colder, heavy with an unnatural stillness, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring and your skin crawl. And then the door unlocked. I froze as the bolt slid back with a metallic scrape, followed by the slow, deliberate creak of the doors swinging open. Beyond it, the hallway stretched into darkness, the dim light barely illuminating the figure standing there. "Hey, Dean," it was her, my wife from the dreams. She stepped into the room, her movements smooth, too smooth, like she wasn't walking but gliding. Her eyes locked onto mine, wide and unblinking. "Welcome home," she said, her voice warm, familiar, and utterly wrong. I stumbled backward, my legs colliding with the coffee table. "You're not real," I whispered, more to myself than to her. Her head tilted, her smile widening. "You don't recognize me?" she asked, stepping closer. Her presence filled the room, the air growing colder with every step. "We've been waiting for you." A second figure appeared behind her, then a third, The children from the dreams. Their faces were blank, their mouths moving silently as they clung to her skirt. "I'm not your husband," I screamed, scrambling to my feet. Her smile faltered. For the first time, something dark and angry flickered in her eyes.
"But you are,"
she said, her voice now layered, fractured, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. "You looked for us. You found us. You can't leave." The lights flickered, and for a moment the world seemed to shudder around me. The furniture shifted, the walls rippled like a mirage. When the light returned, I was no longer in my apartment. I was in the house from the dreams. I saw the broken window and hanging candles everywhere. The cinnamon-scented air was suffocating now, heavy and cloying. The walls were lined with photographs of the family. My family. Every image showed me smiling, laughing, living a life I didn't recognize. I turned to run, but they were everywhere. The wife, the children, figures in the shadows, their faces twisted into something almost human, but not quite. "You don't belong here," I shouted, backing into a corner. My wife stepped closer, her head tilting unnaturally. "But you came back," she said, her voice soft and chilling. "And now you'll stay forever." The children's hands reached for me, their touch cold as ice. My screams echoed through the house as the walls closed in, the photographs dissolving into darkness. The last thing I saw was my own face reflected in the window. Older, worn, and filled with a resignation that wasn't mine. And then there was nothing. When the new tenants moved into the apartment, they found the journal I'd been keeping. It was tucked under the couch, filled with page after page of frantic writing. The last entry read, "It wasn't a dream. I know that now. If you're reading this, don't look for them. Don't answer their call. Don't let them in." Story 2. The Lost Phone. It started as an ordinary day. Nothing about it hinted that my life was about to spiral into something I could barely comprehend. I was on my way home, cutting through the side streets like I always did, when I saw it. A phone lying face down on the pavement. At first, I didn't pay it much attention. Broken phones were a dime a dozen, discarded and forgotten. But something made me stop. Maybe it was the way it seemed out of place, the screen glinting in the fading light. Or maybe it was just curiosity. Either way, I picked it up. The screen was shattered, spider-webbed with cracks, but when I pressed the power button, it lit up. The background was a generic black wallpaper, no clues as to who it belonged to. There were no messages, no missed calls, no photos. Just one contact in the list. Me. I stared at the name, my stomach twisting slightly. Why would someone label their own contact that way? And why was it the only one? Logic told me to leave the phone alone. It wasn't my business, and poking around would only lead to trouble. But logic wasn't exactly my strong suit. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the call button. The line rang. Once. Twice. The sound stretched out, the static between each ring almost deafening. Just as I was about to hang up, the call connected. "Extra glass of this, please." Just as I was about to hang up, the call connected. "Hello?" I said hesitantly. There was a pause, then a voice. My voice. "You shouldn't have done that." The words sent a jolt through me, freezing me in place. It wasn't just similar. It was exactly my voice, the tone, the inflection, everything. Before I could say anything else, the call ended abruptly, the screen going black. The words scabbed my mouth as I refused to let it run without Corey. I stared at the phone, my heart hammering in my chest. I pressed the power button again, but this time it didn't turn on. The battery must have died, or so I told myself. Someone was watching things, I reminded myself. Shoving the phone into my pocket, I hurried home, trying to shake the unease that had settled over me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get the voice out of my head. My voice. 20 minutes later, I started the shower. That night, as I lay in bed, my own phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up, displaying a number that made my blood run cold. People who hadn't heard his. It was. The screen glowed in the dark room, my own number staring back at me. For a long moment, I just sat there, frozen, the buzzing of the phone drilling into my ears. It was impossible. I couldn't be calling myself. Could I? The phone buzzed again, demanding an answer. My hand shook as I picked it up, the weight of it feeling unnatural, almost foreign. My thumb hovered over the green button. "Don't do it," a voice in my head whispered. But curiosity won out again. I swiped to answer. "Hello?" At first there was nothing but static, faint, crackling, as though the line stretched across some vast, unreachable distance. I thought maybe it was a prank or a glitch and then I heard it. Laughter. Soft, almost playful, but wrong in a way I couldn't quite place. It wasn't just laughter. It was my laughter. A sound I recognized all too well, distorted and warped, like a recording played backward. I strained and tried to peer through the lens of the days I'd spent. "Who is this?" I managed to croak, my voice trembling. The laughter stopped abruptly, leaving only the hollow crackle of static. And then, in that same distorted, warped tone, a voice whispered, "You know who I am." I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might break through my ribs. I stared at the screen as it went dark, my reflection staring back at me, pale and wide-eyed. For hours I sat there, phone clutched in my hand, waiting for something else to happen. But the room remained silent, and eventually exhaustion pulled me into an uneasy sleep. The next morning I told myself it was just a dream, a bizarre, unnerving dream brought on by stress and too much caffeine. I even laughed at how paranoid I'd been, though the sound felt hollow in my ears. I left the strange phone on the kitchen counter, half hoping it would disappear on its own, and went about my day. But the calls didn't stop. They came at random times, while I was eating, working, even driving. Always the same number. My number. "So you've recently..." At first I ignored them, letting them buzz endlessly until the voicemail picked up, but each missed call made my skin crawl. I finally broke down and listened to one of the messages. "Your work is my life, and I don't want to sacrifice the time I have to do this," he replied. It was me again, but not quite. The voice sounded like mine, but slower, heavier, as if I were speaking underwater. "Why do you keep running?" it asked. "You can't hide from yourself." I deleted the voicemail immediately, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. That night, the dream came. I was standing in a dark, featureless room, the walls stretching endlessly into shadows. The phone was in my hand, the shattered screen glowing faintly. Ahead of me stood a figure, their face obscured, their posture eerily familiar. I stepped closer, my movements sluggish, like wading through thick water. The figure didn't move. As I reached out to touch them, they turned. It was me, but not. My reflection stared back, its eyes black and empty, its mouth twisted into a smile that didn't belong to me. "You shouldn't have done that," it said, and then lunged. I woke up screaming. Drenched in sweat, my heart racing. The dream felt too real, like something had reached into my mind and planted it there. I'd been sleeping in my boxes with no pillows for weeks and already slipped into Parksley's bed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, the screen lighting up with a notification. A new voicemail. I didn't want to listen, but I had to. My fingers trembled as I pressed play. "Oh, I fight it?" the voice said, soft and mocking. "You'll answer eventually." And then the laughter came again, louder this time, echoing in my ears long after the message ended. I look at the shattered phone on the counter, its dark screen a mirror of my own fear. I had to get rid of it. Whatever was happening, it had started with that phone. Grabbing it, I stuffed it into a plastic bag and drove to the nearest dumpster, tossing it in without a second thought. As I sped away, a strange sense of relief washed over me. But when I got home, it was sitting on my kitchen counter. I stared at the phone on the counter, bile rising in my throat. It was impossible. I had thrown it away. I saw it disappear into the dumpster. And yet, here it was, sitting in the exact same spot as before, its cracked screen mocking me. I didn't touch it. Instead, I backed away slowly, as though it might spring to life if I got too close. My own phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump so hard I nearly tripped. The screen showed my number. The ringing seemed louder this time, sharper, as if it were coming from all directions at once. My house felt smaller, the walls pressing in around me, as the sound reverberated through the air. With shaking hands, I answered. Silence. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The laughter returned, but it wasn't soft this time. It was loud, sharp, and cruel, filling my ears until I thought my skull might split. I dropped the phone, but the sound didn't stop. It seemed to pour out of the walls, the ceiling, the very air around me. And then it spoke. "You think you can escape me?" The voice was mine again, but warped and layered, as though a dozen versions of me were speaking at once. The lights in the house flickered, the shadows twisting and stretching unnaturally. My breath came in ragged gasps as I backed into the corner, the phone screen glowing faintly on the floor. The voice laughed again, and this time it was joined by something else. Whispers. Dozens of them, overlapping and indecipherable, like a crowd murmuring just out of earshot. "Look behind you." I froze, every muscle in my body locking in place. I didn't want to turn around. I couldn't. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent, their words blending into a single, bone-chilling chant. "Exercise effected without traws stimulates the nervous system," he said, resting his arms on the steering wheel barrel. Look. I turned. The kitchen was empty. First, but then I saw it. A shape in the shadows, standing just beyond the reach of the flickering light. It was tall and hunched, its outline vaguely human but wrong in ways I couldn't describe. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and I realized it was holding something. I felt the figure stepped closer, and as it moved into the light, I saw its face. Or rather, the lack of one. It was smooth and featureless, like an unfinished sculpture. Yet somehow I felt its gaze, heavy and suffocating, as if it were staring straight into my soul. "You shouldn't have answered," it said, and the voice was unmistakably mine. The figure took another step and I bolted. I didn't think, didn't grab anything, I just ran, tearing through the house and out the front door, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The worst part about the figure was that his eyes looked out at me, kind and tender. The voice followed. It echoed through the trees, distorted and mocking, as I sprinted blindly down the street. "Run all you want," it called after me. "You can't run from yourself." I didn't stop running until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. The empty streets stretched endlessly before me, and the only sound was my ragged breathing. The figure's voice still echoed in my mind, a taunting reminder that no matter how far I went, I wasn't escaping anything. Finally, I collapsed onto a park bench under a flickering streetlight, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I scrolled through my contacts, desperate to call someone, anyone. But my screen was blank. Every name, every number, gone, except one. My stomach dropped as the contact flickered, the text distorting before my eyes. I wanted to throw the phone, to smash it into pieces, but I couldn't move. My thumb hovered over the screen, drawn to the name, despite every fiber of my being screaming to stop. The moment I pressed call, the air around me seemed to change. The night grew colder, heavier, as if the darkness itself were pressing down on me. Services. The phone didn't even ring. Scratch that. No, it was my voice again, but this time it sounded closer. Too close. "I don't know what you are," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "But leave me alone. Please." The laugh came again, sharp and distorted, cutting through me like glass. "You don't understand, do you?" the voice said, dripping with mockery. "I'm not chasing you. The word chasing isn't in it. I mean, look at you. What? You're chasing me?" Before I could respond, the streetlight above me flickered and went out, plunging me into total darkness. My phone screen dimmed, the faint glow illuminating the ground just enough for me to see the shadow stretching toward me. It wasn't my shadow. It rose slowly, impossibly tall, its edges flickering like static on an old TV. The air around me grew colder still, my breath coming in short, frosty puffs. I scrambled backward, my phone slipping from my hands and clattering to the pavement. The shadow moved, not like a person, but like smoke, twisting and curling as it advanced. The edges began to solidify, forming arms, legs, a head. And then, as I stared in horror, its face appeared. The face. "You should never have answered," it said, its voice perfectly matching mine. Its lips didn't move, but the words echoed in my ears, louder and louder, until they drowned out everything else. I turned to run, but the world around me shifted. The street, the park, the trees, they melted away like wet paint, replaced by an endless void of black. The only thing left was the shadow, now fully formed and standing in front of me, grinning with my face. "There's no escape," it said, stepping closer. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, my voice breaking. Bill squeaked. It tilted its head, mimicking the way I'd looked at the phone earlier. "I already have what I want," it said. "You. Verkamek. I include people." The void around me pulsed, and I felt it, cold and suffocating, wrapping around my chest and pulling me down. The shadow's grin widened as it reached out, its hand merging with mine. For a moment, everything went silent. And then I woke up. I was sitting at my kitchen table, the shattered phone in front of me. The house was quiet. The early morning light streaming through the windows was over, or so I thought. As I stood, my own phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up, and my stomach clenched as I saw the number. It was mine. The call connected before I could stop it. I didn't even have to lift the phone to my ear. From somewhere far away, and yet impossibly close, I heard my own voice whisper, "You're not you anymore." The laughter followed.